close in Lancaster. So I've been interested in environmental issues for a long time. I really wanted to be an artist. Accidentally, I became a social scientist, became a sociologist, and then a human geographer. But really, all the time in the background has been this feeling that making stuff, working with stuff is an absolutely vital part of who we are. Becky mentioned the wood carving. Back when I was doing my PhD, I used to carve wooden ties. I was also renovating a 19th century wooden house in New Zealand. So this turned into carving wooden ties for some reason, and that helped keep me sane while I was doing my PhD. Eventually, it also helped me fund the final years of my PhD after the money had run out. So I've still got some wooden ties. That's one. They kind of developed into other things. So that's a kind of a later model. I'm not sure if you can see that. And then they got to being things like you know, with faces on, all sorts of things. So a little bit 1980s. I think things have kind of moved on, but they, you know, did the trick at the time. They helped keep me sane.
That's brilliant. Nothing wrong. Well, I was going to say nothing wrong with the 1980s. Okay, there was a lot wrong with the 1980s, but it's, you know, there were many good things that came out of it as well. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So yeah, that's fabulous. Thanks, Nigel. And do you want to tell us about, so, you know, like I don't know where to start really with this conversation, because I think there's so much that we've talked about that overlaps with, you know, so much of what obviously Sewing Cafe and Hannah have just said in terms of, you know, but you go into a lot of this in your book, don't you? Your new book, which I will post the link to in the chat, with Bron Szynski. Bron wanted to be here as well today, but he's currently teaching. So, but Bron and Nigel have got a new book out called Planetary Social Thought, the Anthropocene Challenge to the Social Sciences. Let me just put it into the chat. But where should we start, Nigel? Should we start with high heat technology, or with with textiles, or?
I could start with the big picture and then come back to the kind of the more everyday things. So really, the book is about the idea of the Anthropocene, humans impacting on the planet to such an extent that we're transforming the way the entire planet operates. But it's also about the science behind the Anthropocene, which is telling us that the entire planet is unified and integrated and interconnected. But out of that connections comes the possibility for the entire planet itself to transform, to go through changes from one moment to another, usually taking some time. But this happening at every single scale, from the smallest ecosystem right up to the way the entire planet operates, that we live on a planet that's multiple, that can turn from one thing into another. So a lot of the resources that we have, the things available to us, are there because the planet itself has transformed. It's gone from one operating state to another. It is, compared with other planets, at least in the solar system, an especially kind of lively planet, a very changeable planet. All this can sound quite kind of grand and large scale. It's often also stuff talked about mostly by white male scientists in a particular part of the world. So the real challenge for us was, how do we get from this big, grand planet story back to the everyday things that ordinary people do, exactly the kind of things that we've been talking about today? How do we make a connection between the idea of climate change, the idea of Earth system change, and the fact that so many people all over the planet have these amazing skills? And some of these skills go back thousands of years, as we've mentioned, tens of thousands of years. Some of them go back hundreds of thousands of years. So it's really about connecting up those two things, the big things and the everyday things. Two of the examples that we talk about in the book, one of them is the fiber arts, which is exactly, again, all the things that we've been talking about, Hannah and Katrina and the Sewing Cafe. just the things that people have done with fiber, whether plant fiber or animal fiber. And I guess what interests us about that, and this again I think ties in with what Hannah was saying, the fact that the physical world, the living world, is full of these things that are all tangled up. Things hold together when they get tangled up because of that kind of dynamic tension between curly, twisty things, and then you can kind of, you know, deliberately bring them together. So one of the things we got really fascinated in was weaving, taking a weaving loom, which then takes a little piece of that tangling from nature, and then turns it into this incredibly complex art form, really partly by putting a frame around it, and that framing process being really significant as well. So you're taking a little bit of the chaos of the world, and then you're ordering it in different ways. And one of the reasons that's so fascinating too is that with weaving or with any sort of the fiber arts, you know, as we've heard with you know, Hannah and the basket making, you need to plan ahead. You need to kind of program what it is. And there's been an argument, Sadie Plant, a cultural theorist, great name for someone talking about these things, that the weaving loom is the basis, the origin of all programmable machines. So the computers that we're all communicating on ultimately are kind of outgrowths, developments of the weaving loom. So programming a set of operations into like a machine-like device. Or she suggests that it all goes back to this kind of moment of planning out how to bring together fibers to make a piece of fabric. The other example that we use is the idea of high heat technology. So anything done with ovens or kilns or furnaces. So an example of that is just pottery, for example. So you take high heat, you put it inside a container, a box where it's safe, and you use that to transform inorganic matter. The temperatures that potters reach, the temperatures that metal workers, metallurgists reach, 1200 up 1300 degrees, that's pretty much the same temperature as lava inside a volcano. So what people are doing when they're using high heat, and this goes back thousands of years, is they're really kind of reproducing igneous geology in a little space. So all over, you know, parts of the ancient world, you've got villages, you've got towns with effectively mini volcanoes in them, reproducing this power of the earth, this kind of igneous volcanic power, to make objects, really beautiful objects, to make, you know, beautiful pots, to make, you know, metallic objects. So that again really kind of ties in with what the earth can do, and it's a kind of a little bracketing off of you know, the potential, the power of the earth itself. Just to kind of wind up that bit, there's a wonderful piece of archaeological evidence that came into the stories we were researching. And that's a place in the Czech Republic, Dolní Věstonice, the pronunciation's probably wrong, but what they found when they were digging up, excavating the site, was the oldest evidence of a kiln. And it was literally 30,000 years ago. And they thought that kilns hadn't been invented until about 10,000 years later. Quite likely, all the evidence suggests that this was a women's invention tied to the oven, to cooking food. But you know, lots of the earliest ceramic objects, including some of those Venus figurines. So literally thousands of baked objects. What they also found in some of these baked objects was texture. When they looked closer, they realized that the texture was actually woven textile. And again, they thought that the weaving loom wasn't invented for another 10,000 years, but there in these clay fragments from 28, 30,000 years ago was the evidence of weaving. And the weaving is so tight that it's the equivalent, you know, sort of so many threads per inch as contemporary machine weaving. So the fact that 30,000 years ago, here are a group, most likely small group of women, arts around, you know, small households, inventing, or at least pushing forward, the invention of the kiln and the invention of the weaving loom, all in the same place. They're also interesting, right in the middle of the Pleistocene Ice Age. So this is a really hard scrabble time to survive. And yet they're inventing or helping invent, or part of the invention of, these amazing technologies that literally kind of transform the world and continue to do so. So really, a lot of the things we've done in the last 10, 15, 20,000 years come from these inventions. And I love what you were saying, Becky, and a few others saying about women sitting around talking. So probably 30,000 years ago, these women were sitting around chatting, singing, using their looms, also, you know, making stuff, baking stuff in their little kiln, but also kind of inventing their way into the next 20, 30,000 years. But the idea that the storytelling and the making, the crafting, the shaping really kind of come together. So that, for me, that the fact that the storytelling part of today is really interesting as well. And the idea that sometimes you tell stories in a different way while you're making stuff, if that kind of starts to make sense.
Definitely. And I think well, that's got me in mind of, like, yeah, there are so many different ways I could take that, Nigel, but I know that I was just chatting to, well, Victoria a little bit earlier about some people might know Sarah Corbett, who does like craftivism and stuff, and she's talked about that as a very different process for activism, and part of that is not just the making of the finished object, you know, important that is, but it's the conversations that happen, like, you know, and that actually you might, you know, and we've said so many times, haven't we, about how these objects or practicing that craft can start a conversation, and that can be a way in to talking with people about like issues of like social or environmental justice that might be harder to, you know, that if you walk up to someone in the street with a placard, they might be like, oh, you know, like it, but actually engaging with people and talking while crafting can kind of, yeah, bring these different things differently. I guess the other thing that that I wanted to pick up on there that you said, and you very kindly kind of pointed me to this idea that when we talk about, yeah, as you say, all those years ago, because a lot of this was biodegradable, right? So we only know about the linen because it was, the imprint was found on the ceramic. So a lot of this was, it left no impact, like by definition, and that's kind of left us, hasn't it? There's been quite a few sort of social scientists have argued that's left us with a really distorted version of history that's kind of really masculine and really violent, because the clubs and the spears and the knives have persisted, and the bags and the foraging materials and the textiles haven't. And maybe that says something about, yeah, I'll let you say more.
I think that is fascinating. I mean, there really is this very varied way that things are preserved and that things survive. And, you know, as you mentioned, it's only accidentally, in a sense, that clay got baked with the imprint. Otherwise, we wouldn't have known about these things. The other part of it that fascinates me is that so many of these inventions, in fact, almost all of them, seem to have begun as something, making something ornate, making something beautiful, and only later did they become useful. So many of these inventions, you know, were really about just exploring the potential, the possibilities, you know, the textures, the shapes, what happens when you transform matter. And, you know, particularly with things like high heat technology, it's only after about 10,000 years that people start making vessels out of it. The same thing with metallurgy. The first thing was jewelry. It was probably just, you know, blingy little baubles and things. Then it became jewelry. Eventually it became tools and weapons and coins and weights and measures. But I think for thousands of years, it was just jewelry. So many of these inventions begin of just people exploring the potential, the kind of the exuberance of the physical world. Then eventually they become useful. But I think hanging on to the things you do just because they're fascinating, or just for the sake of experiment, or because things are beautiful, that to me is really important as well.
Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess we should ask, shouldn't we? Because I know today's audience, it's brilliant actually, and that's why, one of the reasons why I was kind of excited and scared, because it's a total mishmash of, like, yeah, I've got friends, family, crafting friends, like, but there's a lot of academics and colleagues on the call I know as well, and it's so lovely to have everyone together in this space. And yeah, I'll be really interested in people's feedback. But as this is the Economic and Social Science, sorry, I can't even say it, Economic and Social Research Council Festival of Social Science, I was going to ask you, like, what do you think social and environmental sciences can gain from, say, working with crafts, working with objects in this way? Because we've got this kind of distinction, haven't we, in universities, that, oh, if you want to go and do objects, you go and do art or something, or you go and do, but we're trying to unpick that a little bit, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that social science has always been about, critical social science, we're interested in justice, we're interested in, stopping more marginalization, exploitation. So often it comes back to talking, deliberating, arguing, rather than working with stuff. And again, I think working with materials is such an important part of it. So somehow we've bracketed out away from the work we do. And I think that whole thing about the resistance, the texture, the way that materials kind of push back as you're working with them, that's important. But I think also that again, all the crafts we've been talking about today, the fact that what you do is you explore the space of possibilities, all the different possibilities of color and texture and shape. Sometimes you push them too far and you go off the edge and it's no longer a basket, or it's no longer an item of clothing. You've gone off the edge, you've gone off a kind of threshold. But again, I think that working with, you learn so much from that pushing things and exploring a space of possibility, which I think is much more interesting than just thinking of, engaging with injustice is really, really important, but doing that at the same time as you're engaging with matter and stuff, I think is vital. I also find that with students, a lot of the younger students, obviously they're getting very, very concerned and anxious and depressed about climate change, earth system change, biodiversity loss. As soon as you get them starting to talk about the possibilities of the earth, the things you can do with matter and stuff, they start kind of cheering up and get much, much more positive. And that's just talking about it. Imagine if they were actually making stuff as they were talking about climate change, as they were talking about earth system change. I think it would really, really help their sense of kind of, empowerment and also kind of anxiety. It doesn't solve the problem, but I think it's a different way of talking about it. That's, not quite leading so much to kind of despair. So I'd love to see much more of that kind of making. And as Hannah mentioned, playing. I think, playing with stuff, that is really important too.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, No, absolutely. And I think, again, I don't know, I'm sure there's people on the call, but I've sort of read stuff bordering on like psychology that, talks about exactly, you engage like different pathways in your brain when you get playful or you get creative or you get curious, rather than thinking, I've got to solve this problem, and then you get really constrained and like you can't, you get. So I don't know if, I think I lost Ellen. She sent me a message to say, are you here, Ellen, or have you gone?
All right, I'm back.
You're back. Awesome. I was going to bring in we've had some really nice comments and sort of like questions in the chat. So should we bring some of those in? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know, Kiki, do you want to say something about the kind of, like reusing and transforming of things into different materials?
Yeah, sure. So I was just thinking about the fact that, sorry, Ryan's in the room. Thought I was talking to him. Thinking about the fact that at one point in time, oil was in the ground and that was a natural resource, and it's now plastic. And it's no longer considered, it's no longer a natural resource, but at one point it was. And yet we talk a lot about the circular economy and how we can reintroduce materials back into the cycle rather than recycling them, which we don't end up doing in our current system, or we don't do enough of. And so that's what I'm working on with Precious Plastic Lancaster, is that we recycle plastic locally, all under one roof. So we collect it, we clean it, process it, sort it into color and plastic type, and then we inject and create products out of it. So I'm currently doing all the photography for it, but I just have some items here where, these are entirely usable new products, and they come from maybe broken container lids for Tupperware and that sort of thing, of where we normally say that's the end of the cycle, we can connect it back through. And I think that we see that a lot in the traditions of textiles, of maybe nowadays with fast fashion, we throw things away because you can readily get something new. But in war times, we've seen people taking their flour sacks and turn those into dress, or they'll take their wedding dresses or their fancy dresses and break those down and turn them into something new. With Sewing Cafe, we do a lot of that with like deconstructing some fabric into something else. And that's a lot of what Katrina is dyeing now, is she's using all upcycled materials as her samples. And so, yeah, I think just to me, it's interesting to think about how we can connect people more to that, the social science side of convincing people that it's not about despairing, but reconnecting to the fact that we can create new systems from waste as a resource. And seeing, but also you have to change the industries, you have to change mentalities enough that that becomes the primary source of materials, rather than buying, you know, a recycled plastic product, which is usually 30% recycled and 70% virgin plastic. So just a thought.
Yeah. I mean, where I would kind of reply to you about that is that I think that doing something other than just saying no to all these materials, or just saying no to the processes that produce them. Sure, we want to do a lot less extraction of fossil fuels, but I think when you start to do different things with the products of you know, those resources, you're also starting to think differently about the way the earth works. You're also starting to really think, you know, what else could we do with these earth processes? What else could we do with these strata? What else could we do, you know, with all the things that the earth generates? And I think that is a much more kind of generative way of thinking about it than the kind of just say no. We know that there's got to be an awful lot of saying no to an awful lot of not just fossil fuels, but you know, minerals, the way we extract them. But I think starting with those kind of small objects, you can also, you say, work your way back to the industries, but also work your way back to your whole way of kind of imagining and thinking about the planet. So I think that's also important, you know, working back like you're doing through the materials back to the earth processes. And that can then make earth processes seem much more kind of accessible to us. I mean, you know, you're working with the Carboniferous, you know, you're working with the products of a geological epoch from hundreds of millions of years ago. That's there in your recycled object as well. So you've literally got the Carboniferous era in your hands, and that's also kind of fascinating. It's a way into the history of the earth, as well as just being recycling.
Again, there's a story in the relationship there, isn't there? It's like making that connection that these things don't just come out of nowhere, like they're the result of something and they lead to something, and it's like, yeah, following those stories through a little bit more, I guess. I think we've got loads of like, I think not so much questions, but like really fascinating comments in the chat and stuff. So again, I'm probably missing things here, but again, I know Jen and Irene, you've said about things like about how, you know, and I know, well, Irene, I know you're engineers, Jen, obviously fellow geographer, but we're thinking about this format of like how doing stuff with things, or like yeah, how this can help us maybe engage with students and other audiences in a different way. So again, if either of you want to jump on the mic and say any more about that, you're very welcome to. But I'm fascinated too. And oh, sorry.
No, I'm excited. I've been sitting thinking. So I teach a course called Geography of the Body. It's like the least COVID friendly course ever, because we kind of build environments out of paper tubes. We kind of do stuff together. We move our bodies together. Not going to happen. And I've been really worrying over kind of, well, how can I suppose, create the same kind of spirit of doing things together. I was going to sit down this weekend to try and figure it out, but I think you've answered loads of my questions by putting this together. I just love it. Thank you so much. That's all. There we go.
Good. Oh, thanks so much, Jen. No, it's really, yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, well, some of this was, when I started thinking about this as well, it was kind of, you know, slightly responsible about, I can't take people on field trips this year, you know, I can't take them to Clover in the way that I normally would, and it's like, well, how else? I don't just want people sat in front of a screen, because that's just really not good for us in many ways. So
their cameras off and you're just talking to blank screens. I'm loving seeing all the faces today as well. Thank you. Right.
Yeah. Thank you, that's awesome. And I know it's, well, Elizabeth's put as well, yeah, and I think this has been something that's been really key and really motivating for me as well. So I think it's really important to remember that the earth has agency, that we might just not need to fix it. It's also really important to kind of maintain hope. And I guess, again, that was something that for me came out of this book quite a lot when I was reading it. And you know, I had COVID like really early in the lot, and I was in the garden like feeling crummy, and like it felt like the whole, you know, it was when the pandemic was going really crazy, and I just thought, well, will any of us make it through this? And yeah, at the time, you know, the bulbs were coming up in my garden. I mean, the weather was fantastic, wasn't it, early part of lockdown for those of us in the UK, and the garden was just coming to life around me, and I thought, this is it, I'm not doing that, it's doing itself. And if I just, you know, so it's like, it's not just all about us, like it's there, like really, you know, happy to work with us and stuff. Brilliant. And Irene, do you want to say some stuff about, you've been saying about working with people in Kendal and engineering outreach, which is another like very different topic. Are you there, Irene?
Hi, I am here. I was just looking for something and I couldn't find it online. Yeah, a couple of years ago there was Kendal Fest. It changed from Mint Fest, it changed into something else, and it was all about art, and it was meant to be interactive, and there was a group called Playground Collective that came up from London. One of them, I can't remember his name, he's the senior lecturer in ceramics from Goldsmiths, and they literally ordered a ton of clay, which we then put on trestle tables behind a pub, and he just cut with wire the shape of hills and mountains, and then we just gave balls of clay to people and said the theme is flight, and a lot of people went, oh my God, I'm not creative, I can't do that. And you go, and you just press the ball of clay into their hands and just left them to it. And then the next minute, you know, they've got their tongue sticking out. They're like really concentrating on what they're doing. And it's amazing. And they use it as a way to talk to people whilst they're busy. And we had police officers saying, this could be a good thing in the cells, and all kinds of things. And he's worked with surgeons on their dexterity and all kinds of things. And I think it's the safety of being focused on one thing, but maybe talking about something that's really, really personal without that, you know, eye-to-eye contact. There's something about that makes it easier to share.
Definitely. Thanks, Irene. Nigel, do you want to say anything about any more of that before I wrap up?
Oh no, I was just happily absorbing that. I think it's a wonderful idea, and I would just love to every student in our class to be sitting there while we're chatting or lecturing, whatever, with a ball of clay. I just think that would be a fun, you know, or fibers which they can start to twist together however they'd like. I mean, I think that's how I'd like to be teaching. Great ideas. It's how it should be.
We're going to try a little bit, aren't we? Or I'm going to try like starting next week, so I'll let you know how it all goes. But yeah, I just want to say, well, thank you so much, Nigel. Obviously, I put the link to your book as well in the chat, so several people have already said they're getting a copy, so that's really good. Yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone for today, like all of the speakers, Ellen for helping me with the tech, everyone who's helped behind the scenes and kind of reassured me while I've had a nervous breakdown about it. I've got my lunch sitting here that my husband's bought me, and I've not eaten a thing of it, but I'm going to go and eat now. I wanted to screen share with you actually, so some of the thank you people that have been posting on Instagram and Facebook, like all of the things that you've been making. That's really lovely to see as well. I think I'm running out of time here now, so I won't do that now, but what I will do is, like I say, please, I mean, I would love to, so I'm going to share with you, I will email you all and share with you a link as well to a boring survey I'm supposed to get you to feedback on from the ESRC Festival of Social Science to say how you found this event. But like I say, I'll ask you some more general questions as well, because I would really love to know if you would like to do this again and like future topics and things. And yeah, if there are things that you think we could do to kind of improve it, really. It was just a complete experiment. So, and yeah, people have been asking about sharing the chat and the recordings. And again, I'll do my best to do that as well. So we can, rather than me trying to do all that in the last 2 minutes, I think maybe let's try and think of this. It feels like this could be a productive ongoing conversation, which would be really lovely. And yeah, obviously, I'm really grateful to the ESRC Festival of Social Science gave me some funding towards this as well, which has gone towards Gina making some lovely videos, which I will share with you as well as those gradually premiere on YouTube. And yeah, what else have I forgotten to say? Well, that should be it. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, and please keep posting photos of what you made like afterwards as well. And yeah, let's continue the conversation. So take care, everyone, and enjoy your afternoon. Bye.